will say it is good to see the presence of each one. Again, it is always encouraging to me to see the faces of each and every one. It's like being with family for some reason, and we are family. The topic that I chose to speak on this evening is habits. We all have certain kind of habits as far as that, and habits is a manner of behavior or a pattern. There are good habits and there are bad habits. And the term bad habits brings to mind things like maybe smoking or drinking too much, biting your nails. A lot of things there could be bad habits as far as that. And another thing that would be spreading gossip, complaining, or backbiting. These can be bad habits too. When we think about that, sometimes we may fall in that category if we're not careful. Because it's easy to complain about things when they're not going your way. In my case, my way. I have to watch about that pretty often too, because it seems as though if I complain about it, it makes it easier. It doesn't, but it seems like it gets it off of your shoulders more or something. I don't know. But again, we need to watch for that, because it is a bad habit. We'll get into more of that as we study more too. Another thing is worry can be a bad habit. And that's something other that bothers me sometimes too. There's so many things to worry about, because it's like you got to control things. If everything's going right, it's fine. But when things begin to go off kilter just a little bit, how do I fix this? And there's times, we can't fix it. It's beyond our capability. Maybe with somebody else's help, maybe you can. But sometimes it just takes God to help us. Human people might not be able to do it at all. It just has to rely on that and let that worry go away from that. It can hurt us deeply as far as that. But good habits, when we think about them, they can be of great value to us. The habit of prayer is something other to be desired. When we think about that, our habit of prayer, do we have that? Is there certain times that we do it? Or is it just the habit comes along every day at any time as far as that? It's just, we may be going along, maybe driving down the road, and a prayer comes in mind. It may be, I've heard some say as farmers, when they were on the tractor, they could do their best prayer, because they'd just be able to travel along there and just think about God and put that to use there. We think about Daniel. He was willing to risk his life even rather than give up his habit of prayer that he had. And the Bible has much to say about habits that will benefit us for a lifetime and even beyond, and habits that are bound to destroy us. One question is, what are some of the bad habits the Bible talks about? If you will, turn to 1 John 3, verse 8. 1 John 3, verse 8. He says here, he that committeth sin is of the devil, for the devil sinneth from the beginning. For this purpose the Son of God was manifested, that he might destroy the works of the devil. Sin is a habit none of us can completely end. And we might not completely get over that. Not by ourselves anyway. But a pattern of sinful living shows that we may not be serious enough to really follow God. It may be, that habit it's just there and we just keep falling into it. And are we serious enough to get rid of that habit? We need to consider our habits and say, ask ourselves, is that something that I can do again? You know, we talked about complaining. Look at Numbers, the 11th chapter. Numbers, the 11th chapter, and verse 1. Numbers 11 and verse 1. It says here, and when the people complained, it displeased the Lord. And the Lord heard it, and his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burnt among them, and consumed them that were in the uttermost parts of the camp. You know, the Israelites there developed a bad habit of complaining. And we remember that, you know, how they were thrown out there into the wilderness, basically. They were freed from the bondage that they were in, but yet then they were complaining about not having this and not having that, you know, whatever. And yet we find that God was not pleased with that. You know, it's kind of scary when I think, if I think complaining is going to help me, you know, it might help my physical, mental capacity, but what about my spiritual? How does that affect me with God? You know, we find that the Israelites was not pleased. They did not please him with their complaining. So we need to be careful about that. That's something that I need to really work on and not worry about complaining so much as far as that. Keep that out of my process of living, I guess you'd say. Not complaining so much. Look at 1 Timothy 5 and verse 13. 1 Timothy 5 verse 13. And withal they learn to be idle, wandering about from house to house, and not only idle, but tattlers also, and busybodies, speaking things which they ought not. You know, too much time and too little can be fertile ground for bad habits to form. You know, I think about this, that we can see this if we're honest with ourselves. A lot of times that's the way it is, isn't it? If we're just out there and not really doing things that are positive for us, then a bad habit can develop from it. Maybe it is complaining. Maybe it is something else there, you know, that's speaking about others and not in a good form, or in good fashion. You know, things of this nature then. You know, here we see there that Paul was talking about these widows who had actually too much time on their hands and were going about them and causing these problems in there, the way that they were gossiping and backbiting, whatever the case. You need to watch about that. I think my time is up almost. Lord Joe told me I had one battery on this one, in this thing here, I had one bar on the battery. She said, I don't know if it'll last or not, but she said, I'm afraid that I'm throwing away good batteries sometimes because they only have one bar. She said, let's try it and see if it'll make it all the way or not. And I said, you mean that way it'll give me a cue that that's my time up. Anyway, the next question we want to look at is, how do I deal with bad habits? Look at Romans, the 7th chapter, verse 15. Romans, the 7th chapter, and verse 15. Paul says here, for that which I do, I allow not. For what I would do, that I do not. But what I hate, that do I. You know, have you ever felt this way yourself? I mean, there's a lot of times I think about this. Why did I do that? That's not right. You know, I know better than that. Why did I not do the good part? Why did I just turn and do that like that? You know, that's the way Paul recognized this, though, and, you know, he gives us an idea of how to really take care of those bad habits in that sense. Because if we recognize them, then and we understand what it actually is, and we accept that we have done that and not deny it, then we can work on trying to get rid of those bad habits. But if we just say, it's okay, I'm not that bad. I don't do that often. But you might look back and think about it. Maybe I did that more than I thought I did. Maybe it just, to me, it doesn't show, but other people see it and just haven't said anything about it, So I need to look at myself and say, confess them honestly, in other words. Look at those bad habits and say, okay, I know I do this, I need to really concentrate on that and stop doing that. But the other thing is, Paul knew he couldn't completely get over those on his own. He knew that with God's help, he could do it. And it probably wouldn't happen overnight. That's something else that you have to think about. You can't just say, I'm getting rid of that habit. It's kind of like a New Year's resolution. A lot of times they say, okay, I'm going to lose weight. Starting with January 1, I'm losing weight. Well, maybe a couple of days, but then, boy, that sure looks good. I'm going to have some of that big old piece of cake right there, and I need another soft drink. That habit comes right back, doesn't it? It's something that we have to work on. I remember the words of Sister LaRue one time. Said it takes 2 weeks to form a habit. 2 weeks of work at it. And I've thought about that lots of times. And I used to sleep pretty late. But after 2 weeks, I can get up before the alarm goes off now, And that's kind of the way it is with habits. They form. You get up at a certain time, and it's a habit then. Like that. So if we decide to give up a habit, think about this. Maybe you can't do it in a day, or 2, or 3. But if you work at it day by day, each time, keep it in mind every day, that habit to get rid of. And think about, okay, today I'm not doing that. And then by phase, it can go away. And do it in these phases of one day at a time. Look at 1 John, the 2nd chapter. 1 John, 2nd chapter, verse 15. He tells us here, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Sin often appears lovely and attractive. In the same way, bad habits often make us feel good even though we know that they're not good for us. When you think about that, a bad habit may be something other that we kind of enjoy. And we know that it's been said, Michael McCorkle was saying this one time, sin is fun. I've mentioned it here before. And that's kind of the way with bad habits sometimes. I'm not going to say this right here. Katie told me he was trying to stop drinking a lot of Dr. Peppers, and I haven't yet. I still keep thinking I'll get rid of them. I'll quit. But every morning it seems like you got to have that Dr. Pepper. It's hard sometimes. They're very good. It tastes good. The water just doesn't have that pizzazz about it or something, But anyway, if I keep working at it harder, I'll put that thing down or stay away from it anyway. But it's bad habits are hard because we're losing something that we really like. And you got to understand, sometimes to get rid of a bad habit, there's a grieving process in there. It's like, I'll try to get by without it, It's hard sometimes, isn't it, to break a habit, especially with those that we like, things in that sense. And sometimes those bad habits are something that we may not really think we like, but it just comes to us in that sense. It just kind of overcomes us there. Look at Colossians 3. Colossians 3 and verse 2. Set your affection on things above, not on things on the earth. You know, we must replace our bad habits with something good. You know, just like with the Dr. Pepper there, it might be, maybe we can find one of the little, not an energy drink, I don't know that would help us there, but you know, one of those, a drink there that maybe just water with a little lemon in it. Something of that nature, you know, just something that kind of helps set it on there. Maybe it's something other like that it might have to be, say, a water that's a little bit sweeter than we would want, but we can start cutting back the sweetness off of it till pretty soon we just like the water. That tastes so good anymore. Maybe again in phases we can drop that. So, you know, replace those bad habits with something good. Look there in Romans, the 6th chapter. Romans 6, verses 12 through 14. We want to read there. Let not sin therefore reign in your mortal body, that ye should obey it in the lust thereof. Neither yield ye your members as instruments of unrighteousness unto the sin, but yield yourselves unto God as those that are alive from the dead, and your members as instruments of righteousness unto God. For sin shall not have dominion over you, for ye are not under the law, but under grace. You know, one of Satan's biggest lies is that you're a victim who has no power to resist some of these powerful influences around us. You know, that's something other we need to consider. He makes that lie in front of us. And if we're not careful, we believe that lie. That we have no power to resist that. These powerful influences are going to take over no matter what. He's going to do it. And you know, it may do it if we try to handle them ourselves. He may take that, and has done it several times. But you know, with God's help, and when we think about this, God is way more powerful than anything that can suck us into those type of thoughts and things that control us in that situation. By the power of prayer, by the help of God, and by the help of other Christians, we can overcome some of those bad habits. It may take some work. It may take some help. From encouragement from our brothers and sisters. And again, by the prayer to God. Next, how do I develop good habits? Look at Hebrews, the 10th chapter. Hebrews, the 10th chapter. Again, this verse we know very well. Verse 25. Not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much more as you see the day approaching. You know, meeting together as believers is a good habit, because it provides the necessary fellowship with Christians. And the fellowship that we have with Christians is so much more positive than those of non-believers. And I don't mean that bad about some of those people are good people, don't get me wrong, but yet some of them, you know, have bad habits that will lead us off if we're not careful. We tend to start following them. But when we're around other Christians, it's easier to help those to form good habits, isn't it? Because they have good habits. You know, it helps develop those habits that what a Christian should do and be. And that's something other that I can say for sure is a great benefit. Is to being with people that are positive. You know, there's a few old television shows that are on, and sometimes when I'm down with Mom there, we'll turn those on. One of them happens to be the Andy Griffith Show, and I watch that with her some, and I think, what happened to all those shows that had positive, good morals? Good, clean shows. And I grant that there's some things on there, you know, that you would think maybe we should do that, but there are a lot of good positive things in there. I think about Andy when he talks to Opie, his little boy, and he uses a sharp mind to convey what he wants him to learn. And, you know, things of that nature. It's just, you can learn from those things. But also know that working with others out in the world, there are some good people that you don't mind being around because they have some good morals to them and that. But if you're around some of those other people that speak foul, use profanity, things of that nature, you have to work hard not to pick those habits up. You know, that you see examples that shouldn't be there, that shouldn't be part of our lives, as a Christian. You know, we need to work hard at that. But yet, when we're together, you know, it makes it easier because we are striving in the same line, trying to reach the same goal. Look at Psalms 28. Psalms 28, verse 7. It says here, "The Lord is my shepherd and my shield. My heart trusteth in him, and I helped. And I am helped. Therefore my heart greatly rejoiceth, and my song will I praise him. And with my song will I praise him." You know, as a young boy here, David, you know, he developed the habit of talking to God, singing songs about him, and writing psalms. You know, that helped him so much to trust in him and trust in God and follow God all of his life. You know, these are things there that can help us develop good habits. Is to think on God's word, to trust in him, to try to please him, and try to develop those kind of habits. Look at Romans, the 6th chapter, verse 16 as we close here. Romans 6, verse 16. Paul says here too, "Knowing not that to whom ye yield yourselves servants to obey, his servants ye are to whom ye obey, whether of sin unto death or of obedience unto righteousness." Breaking bad habits is a choice. It doesn't just happen. It's a choice. You know, if I teach my kids there that everything you do has consequences to it. And so you have a choice. And you have to choose, you know, what's right and what's wrong. And look at those things because those consequences comes up, you know, from making those choices. Is this a good choice I'm about to make? Or is this one that's going to caused me to have problems. And I hope I can convey that on to my grandkids. You know, I hope that they will look at that and think about, before they do something other there, they think about it just a second. Is this a good idea or not? Am I making a good choice or not? And if I see that I have a bad habit, can I make the choice to get rid of that habit? Can I choose to do what's right? You know, we stand in the crossroads every day, where you have the opportunity, you know, to choose bad ways, and oftentimes it'll be sinful ways as far as that, or God's way. The choice is ours. We'll close at that. Again, we never know the minds of the audience, though, that may be here, someone here that may have never obeyed the gospel and understanding it and wanting to do so. We'd be glad to help you at this time. Or for maybe someone that has strayed away from and feel like they need the prayers of the church or so, we'd be glad to help you with that. Maybe just need prayers for strength. Whatever the case may be, we'd be glad to help you and assist you if you'll come in and have a seat on the front row as we stand and sing a song of invitation.